Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are very excited for this inaugural customer hands-on webinar. Yay! We're glad to have you here. So I'm Laura. I run events and social media. Please follow us and say hi. You're talking to me. I want to do a little bit of a housekeeping before we dive right in to the new workflow UI. There are a couple of attachments for you to download, and as part of your GoToWebinar control panel, you should see the handouts. So we have today's slide deck for you. We also have our new overview of Treasure Data and more about us as an enterprise customer data platform and how we enable a single actionable view of your customers. Because we can handle the scale, security, and complexity required by global enterprises. And that's great because it lets you deliver superior customer experience and really lets you make data-driven decisions. So that's the second thing. Third thing is, for all you data analysts and IT folks out there, white paper on how to get marketing data requests off your backlog. I enjoy that title. I thought it was funny. So yeah, those are there for you to check out. At the end of the presentation, we will be taking any and all questions that you have. So you should also see in your control panel a section for you to ask any questions. Ask them at any point during the presentation as they occur to you, and we'll get to them at the end. So I'm excited that with me today we have Kyoto Tamura, who is our Chief Solutions Strategist. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for remembering my title, right?
Yeah.
Everybody does. Hi, everyone.
And also we have Rob Parrish, who is our Director of Product. Good morning, Rob.
Hello, everyone.
Fantastic. So without further ado, I believe, Rob, you are kicking us off here.
I am. So, yeah, thanks for joining us this morning. Just for a little bit further background on what I do here, myself and my team lead a good chunk of what Treasure Data does, our analyst IDE experience for data management, writing SQL queries, building workflows, which we'll go over today, queries and processing, core backend storage, data pipeline management with workflow, and more. So excited to be with you. Yes. So today we will primarily be going through our new workflow UI. So this is a feature that we're in middle of general availability for. We've kind of been doing a private access for the last few months. This is a new experience for those of you that are familiar with our workflow management tool, so that you can create, edit, and manage your workflows entirely from the Treasure Data console. So we're going to go over what's workflow, the core service. When do you need workflow, and so the background use cases, and then we'll go through a hands-on demo, which Kyoto is going to help us with. So first of all, what's workflow? Workflow management is a tool that allows you to manage complex dependencies of data processing tasks. This can be across, from a Treasure Data perspective, input, processing, and output of the Treasure Data system. We support both scheduled and trigger-based execution of that workflow. And we have a cloud-based solution, but you can also host it on your own client side. And the client-hosted version can also run custom code. The cloud-based version has both a web UI and a REST API access to it. And when we, as we are a open source focused company, when we developed the core workflow management piece, we developed it as an open source project. We called it DigDag. We have a cute little icon in the corner that we really enjoy. And so you can also learn more about that open source project and actually contribute as well if you're that type of individual that wants to get involved with open source. So yeah, and then what we provide to our customers is a hosted version so that you don't have to worry about learning about how to manage DigDag. And then we also have a proprietary UI, which is what we're going to be showing you today to make management easy and hopefully fun. So when you're thinking about what you can do with TD workflows as a core service, effectively you can create a tree or a DAG directed acyclic graph of processing steps. you can develop locally and push treasure data to run on a scheduled basis. Now you can develop in the UI as well. And you can operate tasks on nearly every part of treasure data. So whether it's a Presto or Hive query, a data connector, import, you can create to append tables. You can also do a result export. And then we also manage tasks across all the other cloud systems as well, even from our hosted workflow environment. And then we have parameterization for easy cloning, sharing, and reuse. You can manage email alerts for when task fails or SLAs are not met, and a management UI. So you know you need workflow when. You have many, the real impetus for workflow when we originally were creating it was our customers had tons of scheduled queries, but they had implicit dependencies to those scheduled queries. So maybe you have one query starting at 1 a.m., another one at 1:20 a.m., another one at 1:40 a.m., and maybe when you first started using treasure data, you had a series of 10 to 20 different queries, but all of a sudden now you might have 100 or 200 that you're managing. And so now some queries, even though you want the scheduled time to run in a certain order, some queries take a little bit longer than expected because you have new data load. And so workflow management can help you deal with that situation. Another situation is when you have shared logic between queries. So in this situation, we have a with and subquery being used by both query 1 and query 2. You can make more efficient use of your treasure data resources if you have that with statement broken out into its own task, and then those two queries built as dependent tasks. So you can build that dependency structure with workflow. And then also we've seen many of our customers have very long, complex SQL queries. So it could be thousands of lines long, and debugging can be a pain. So if you want to understand when and why queries fail, you can use a workflow management system in order to break that query apart. And so that when a particular part of it fails, you can isolate that and help understand and then dig in more easily into debugging. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kyoto for a hands-on demo.
Cool.
And actually, first, I think just an overview of the workflow UI.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Kyoto. And what I'm going to do is I will walk you through some sample data sets. This is totally demo. One of the data sets you probably recognize. It's called sample data sets. It's in everyone's account. It's read-only. And I also created another data set called real-time sample data. If you go there, I've actually captured every 5 minutes the latest and greatest of Bitcoin prices. So if you're into that kind of thing, you might find this interesting. I'm actually scraping this using workflow, so I'll go into that later. So, but what you really ought to look for when you log in with the feature enabled is this new tab called Workflows. And because this is an internal account, there's some example workflows already. Let's take a look at attribution model. So this is the one that we use to demo attribution model. So it does a couple of things and eventually calculates different types of attribution models. Okay, so this is all good and everything, but all of you folks are existing customers. I suppose everyone takes advantage of saved queries. So let's start there. I have a couple of saved queries here. And typically what happens is what I call the death by 1,000 crones. And as you can see, there's this one job that is scheduled every hour. So let's take a look at that one. And it drops the table, create a table, and then there's this calculation. And as you can see, what it is doing is it's looking at the sample data set of the NASDAQ data. And by ticker, it's calculating the historical max, min of open and close, and writing that down to this table. Now, it's a very typical SQL job. And as you can see, it's been running every hour, and you can see I didn't know how to write SQL at one point. But it's been running every hour since. Let's go back, and there's actually two other queries that seem to also run every hour, but not at the top of the hour, 10 minutes later. And excuse me, so if I go over here. So good thing is this query has been running as well. Let's look at the query result, and what it is doing is it's taking the symbol in the field from the derived table that I just created with the other query that I just had. And I'm just ordering them by the single day gain of the top 10, right? So it's, there's some tickers there, guilds I recognize. So this runs every hour. And there's another one that is similar to that, where it's actually looking at the top 10 by drop. So you can see, if you're shareholders of these companies at one point, those could have been pretty bad days for you. So that's the sample workflow. So how does this run right now? This runs because every hour there's this mother query that runs. And you, or at least the author of this query assumed that it runs within 10 minutes. So by the time the 10th minute of the hour comes up, you can run these other two queries at the same time. But this can fail. For example, what if this takes more than 10 minutes? What if this query is changed by one analyst and starts failing? Then these derived tables are now acting on the wrong data, right? In the worst case, they start failing too, because they might not be able to find the right columns or even the table itself. So this is where workflow is really helpful, because it really consolidates a series of tasks and group them into a single workflow, and you'll have more visibility into where things are, why they're succeeding, where they're failing, where they're spending time, and all that observability stuff. So let's go into workflow, and I'm going to actually start creating a workflow from scratch. So you go here, and when you open, you probably have no workflow if you're new to workflow. And if you've actually used our command line version in the past, you'll have some of your existing workflows here. But what you want to do is hit this button and create a new one. So the first thing is always naming. So what I'm going to do is customer CES demo, 2018, March 14th. And we've done some work for you. So if you really want to start on a clean slate, you can always choose blank, but you can also start with some simple workflow. So let's start with a simple saved query, because the goal here is to convert a series of staggered saved queries into a single workflow. So when I click on this, well, we provide some very lightweight visualization of what's going on. So the immediate thing that you notice is that there are two tasks, and the task one runs before task two. Unless specified otherwise, everything runs top to bottom sequentially. And it's calling one saved query after another one. So I'm going to first save this, create an edit. Great, the workflow has been saved. And now I have to fill those queries with what I had before. So I'm going to open another tab here. Go to this query. And I'll copy the name of the query. And here, I'm going to change it. So that's the first query. And that's it. One thing that I need to change now is, remember that this query is going to run every hour as is, but now we're converting them to workflow. You don't want to do that. So I'm going to go here and delete the scheduling part of it. Do not delete the query, delete the scheduling. And save it. So this is no longer scheduled. The next step is, remember there are those two derived queries. So I'm going to go to this one, the very same thing. I'll copy that name, put it here. And over here, I will go click on this. No more scheduling. And oh no, like the sample only has 2 sections. Well, we need a 3rd section for the 3rd query. So let's do that. Sorry about that. Let me save that. I'm here. The second one. And you know, like you're winning when you don't even have to think all that much while you're doing all this. So I'm going to create another section, task 3, TD run. And I'll go more into details of what these little parts be. So let me save this first. So this is saved, and it's actually doing automatic syntax checking, which is helpful because sometimes we don't know where to put the spaces and such. So let me run this once because you want to run a query once to show that it's actually working. Then you want to go schedule it. So I'm going to go hit new run. The workflow has been triggered. And once it's running, you have like all the histories by the revision ID. And right now there's only one revision. Oh no, it says failed. So what is it? Tap notify. So if I go here, that is probably because I did not specify the database. So let me go ahead and do that. To specify database, what I will do is I have this meta section export and TD database, and the database is called sample dataset. And while I'm here, I probably have to change this other query too, right?
Yeah, and so that should be sufficient. If you're in a situation where your saves queries already reference the database in the query itself,
okay,
you won't have this issue.
Yeah.
But if you just reference the table, can you go back to the saves query for a second?
Got it.
Can you just show this for a second? Right, so if you notice how in the top left corner, you're referencing the database. If you've also referenced it in the saves query, you don't have to also reference it in your saves query, in your workflow.
So what I need to do is go back here. Oops. Not run. Save. So that's been saved. Go to this query, and I need to just say sample datasets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just need to update it. All right, saved.
You can see if it runs once.
Save and commit. And you run, right? I think I still have to specify, no?
You can try specifying it in the workflow.
Yeah, because it failed, right? Live debugging. So let's go here. And we need to set the database to be a sample dataset. Oh, actually, I should probably set it to this other one, customer webinar. Here you go. Save and commit. So they can see it's easy to iterate. You run. There you go. That looks like running. So while that is running, I will go over a little bit of other parts of the UI. So this is where the definition goes. So what I was missing early on was specifying the parent database. This is just like selecting a drop-down. Back to Rob's point, so long as you give the fully qualified path name for your table objects, it doesn't really matter which database you're in, so long as you have access to it. The other thing is this notion of project revisions. So we give history of everything, and you can go back and run a specific revision as needed. And this is still running, but hey, it is succeeding now. So it already did the first task, it's doing the second task, and it's going to do the third task soon. And the good thing about doing this is, unlike saved queries, see how I had instant visibility to which phase of the workflow was failing. So in my case, it showed that my first task was failing, so I could just look at that query. And doing something like this is much harder when you have, say, 20, 30 saved queries with some dependencies among them. And you have to go and chase down like which query failed and which query didn't. And with this, the third task failed, so I have to look at it. Select. Oh, the table doesn't exist. And that is probably because queries lost. Because I'm in the wrong database. So this has been debugged. So now I'm here. I can go back. So what happened in the latest one is the first two tasks succeeded, but the third failed. So what I'm going to do now is I'll run this, but just for the previously skipped, I'm going to skip the previously successful one. So I'm going to go run it. And this should work fine because workflow has not changed, but the reference saved query now has. So this should run successfully. There you go. Different sections. Yeah. So this is the overall timeline. This, as you just saw, updated in real time. You can drill into individual tasks. So in this case, the third one was the one that was failing, but that's not succeeding. And you're also familiar with this view. The other thing that is really helpful is for the workflow level logs. So in addition to the logs that you can reference in individual jobs, you can also look at overall workflow log. So you can triage whether the workflow is failing because of a particular step, or maybe there's something wrong with the workflow itself. Also, each workflow has this notion of a session. So we worked in a particular session. And in a session, there's one or more attempts that you can have. So you can see that our initial attempt failed because of my misconfigured database. That was intentional, by the way. And but the second attempt actually worked because I updated the reference to the query. So all of this is good, but actually we're now officially less efficient than the previous scheme because those two tasks, task 2 and task 3, they're not running in parallel. They're running serially. In the past, they were running in parallel because they do not depend on each other. Task 2 depends on task 1. Task 3 depends on task 1, but there was no dependency between the two, which means you should parallelize, which we support. So let me go back to the workflow again. And I'm going to go edit. And what I'm going to do is I want to put those two folks into the same group. And in order to do that, I will create a parent task. So let's call it parallelized. And as you can see, the way you declare a task is to have a section that is prefixed by plus and suffixed by colon. And you indent everything under it. And I need to give it a flag that says, hey, I want this to be parallel. Then I'm going to go and indent stuff. So now, like, the way to read this is I'm going to do task 1 first, which creates the mother-derived database, table. Then I'm going to parallelize these two subtasks, and they're going to now go run in parallel. But before any of that, I got to go and save and commit. So now we have the latest version. And you can see that in project revision, you see that this is the new one, and those were my early attempts trying to debug it. So now there's the new version. Let's run it. Workflow has been triggered. So task 1 is running. Task 1 is successful. And now task 2 and 3 start at the same time. Now task 2 is done, and task 3 is done. So we successfully parallelized this. Do remember though, like when you run 2 queries at the same time, they're going to go for resources at the same time. So you always want to balance between concurrency and also sometimes like staggering or like sequencing so that you make best use of your resources. So there's still one more step left, which is scheduling. And in order to do scheduling, you just add a section at the beginning. And do you remember the syntax? If not, I will just look it up.
It's a good chance to go to docs.treasuredata.com.
Yes. So let me go to docs. Go search for workflow. Samples.
Just go to the home one.
And scheduling. Great. So you can read all about it, but if you want to specify your time zone, we highly, highly recommend doing everything by UTC so that you don't get surprised by daylight savings and such. And it has like the typical scheduling workflow. Remember, our initial query was hourly, so what I am going to do is to use this section hourly. So let me go back. Time zone. UTC, and schedule, hourly. That's it. So now I save and commit, and that's it. It's been scheduled. So now this is going to run every hour with parallelism in place for the second step, and first step kicking off the pair of derived queries. So this is a simple example that we have. One thing that I want to touch on is that a lot of the times the initial step or the trigger of the workflow is not a creation of a table, but typically import of data using our input transfer. So we do support that with something called the TD load, which is one of the operators. And how do you actually reference an existing input transfer? Just like I just referenced a saved query. So what you do is, I don't have a transfer right now, so I need to create one. Or I don't think I have one because this is a new one. So I need to look into. So I'll create a new transfer here. Or if not, I'll just log into another view. Okay, let me log into another view. So I'll log out. And go into demo. Voila. I have my input transfer. So like there are all these input transfers that are currently running, and I'm sure if you use Data Connector, you have a few of yourself, of your own. And what you do is you go to these 3 dots over here, and there's a section that says copy unique ID. And once that has been copied to clipboard, you can go back to workflow. And remember, I just logged into a different account, but you will have, it's a good idea. Let me create a new one. Create an edit. Then you would have like data import. Then you have the section called TD load, and you just copy it like that. So this bring data in and save and commit. And that's it. And that references that existing input connector and it brings data in. Just like save the queries, after you've done this, you have to go back to your connection. What's that?
Well, this is someone else's input transfer, so you may not want to do it in this one.
Yeah, I know. But you go to edit, and you want to make sure that you don't run it on schedule anymore. So that is it in terms of use cases. And one of the things that I also want to cap it off is alerting. So when a workflow fails, automatically the owner of that workflow gets notified. So this is like, for the entire workflow only, meaning that if any of the steps fails, and as a result, if the workflow fails, you get notified with a link to the workflow and everything. Sometimes, though, you want to handle different alerting based on a particular step and who it is and all that stuff. And I believe there is a section about this, maybe not. Notification. And you can actually send emails using something called the mail operator. And this is highly configurable. I'm not going to go into details here. Please look at the documentation. But what you can do is, for example, set up alerting, and that is not just about workflow, but the state of the data. So let's say you look at the max and min value of a particular field, let's say the age. Well, age should probably be, well, it should be at least 0. And for many businesses, maybe it should be at least 18. Maybe you have some data compliance issues where you should not be collecting data of the minors, right? In those cases, you can actually create a step in a workflow where it validates data, and if it violates any of your internal rules, it emails the right people. And all of these fields are configurable using dynamic variables. So you can say, in this table, where the table name is dynamic, we found an age value that is fishy, right? Or in this table, we found the number of unauthorized access attempts to be too high, if you're looking at like system logs. So there are many, many ways to use this, and all of this, again, is configurable. If you have any questions, let us know anytime. But also, there's a lot of documentation around it. So that caps off the demo. And if you have any questions,
we do have some questions.
Let us know.
Yeah. So from Jeff, we have this is from more in the beginning of the presentation. Can the visual representation of the workflow that comes up when you start a workflow from a template be generated for all workflows?
That is a question for Rob.
I'm now reading the question myself.
Can the visual representation of the workflow that comes up when you start a workflow from a template be generated for all workflows?
So we do not yet support the automatic generation of visual representations of a workflow, but it is something that we've gotten requested in the past, and we are seriously considering adding it because it is a very good way to validate that you've created the workflow in the way that you've expected. And so unfortunately, we don't do that today. We use it as a guide for the template section, but it is something that we are seriously considering adding in the near future.
Okay, great. Yeah, keep those questions coming in, everybody, if you have more. We have another one here from Stan. So does removing the schedule from the query in the workflow that's currently being created actually modify what is saved in the original list of queries, or is it a new copy of that original query?
No, it is actually the same. It's not a new copy. It's the same workflow. So actually, I probably should have descheduled it first, then referenced it. That way it avoids at least the workflow save the query running while I'm editing workflow. That said, my recommendation is make sure that when you're migrating a series of saved queries into a workflow, go over these corner cases and avoid the hours. Like, don't try to migrate, say, 10 minutes before your series of saved queries kick off. That probably won't be a good idea. Another way to test this is copy some of the tables into a database, let's say, and try replicating the saved queries as a new workflow there. And only after you've validated those, you can go ahead and update and decommission saved queries, if you will.
Okay, cool. We got one more here, also from Jeff. What happens if I schedule a workflow to run every hour and the workflow takes more than an hour? Does it run two in parallel till the person starts a second, or not start the second?
Very good question. So actually, I just added I saw your question, so I added some documentation to the slide deck that I'll move over to in a second. So by default, the second workflow will begin running, but there are a few options that are available. Let me go. That you have, and sorry for the, I think it's because I'm the background, but so variability can occur for a number of reasons, but there's two features. One is a skip on overtime, true or false, and so some people create workflows that run every hour, but they're doing it, but they're still reprocessing all of the data. In that case, the only option that you would add under the scheduling section is skip on overtime true. And so in this case, the next session, so let's say you have one for 1 a.m. and one for 2 a.m., the 2 a.m. session would just be skipped. The 1 a.m. session would go till completion, and then the 2 a.m. session would never run, and the 3 a.m. session would start running. The second option is to actually have a last executed session time variable. So this is a fairly advanced topic, but if you have an incremental workflow, so let's say one that runs every hour and it processes only an hour of data. So let's say every hour you're processing all the data that was ingested in the previous hour. You would have a problem if all you did was skip an hour, because then all of a sudden your 2 a.m. Data, or the data that would be processed during the 2 a.m. session, would be skipped, and you will have never processed the data. In that case, you'll either want to say skip on overtime false, or you'll want to actually have your variables that you would use parameters within your SQL queries to also change based on the most recently run session. And so these variables, let's see if I can get to the proper section. Oh. I'll show you where this is added. But effectively, workflow has a series of the ability to use a set of parameters that allows you to run incrementally. I'm still on the wrong page. Here we go. Jobs, how to schedule. So I may follow up to this group with the particular documentation page after, but effectively you can use parameters in order to set a incrementally scheduled job so that you're only processing data in the last hour, and then these options allow you to actually change the range of data so that if the 1 a.m. session would run from the last hour, the 2 a.m. session would be skipped, and the 3 a.m. session would actually run and process data for the last 2 hours. So that's a fairly advanced topic that I don't have an example prepared for right now, but it's something that maybe we can follow up in a future webinar and also send out as an email to the person who asked that question.
We can actually send out links to docs. We got another question. Can we send links of docs which provide the workflow information? We will absolutely do that in our follow-up email from this webinar that you will get tomorrow. We have another question from Sankana. We have many input transfers created from our database, and on top of that, we have created multiple queries. When I create workflow, I would like to make sure the dependent tables have been refreshed with new data. Is it possible to create some kind of dependency in workflow to check if the tables have been refreshed or not before starting the process?
So in this case, we would probably recommend, so if you have many input transfers created, you can have a workflow that's quite large. And so I've seen workflows with some customers that have 20, 30 different input transfers that it's managing, and that they create groups within groups, so 2 levels of nesting in order to manage this type of use case. You can also run a check command as part of your workflow. So that workflow would actually generate a query to check whether you get the results that are expected. So I've also seen other users, instead of maybe they have separate workflows for all their ingest and separate workflows for some later processing, that later workflow could still have an initial check task in order to run a query, see if you've gotten the data right, see if your most recent data point is within an expected time period, and then only continue once that's happened, and then that check command can keep running until you've had that occur. So there is a option for that available that we'll follow up with.
Yeah. So for example, like if you're doing a daily batch, you might want to check that this table has, X many rows coming from this day, and that can be written as a SQL query that runs inside a check section. If that check fails, then you can be notified as the owner of the table, or as Rob said, you can make it wait until that check becomes true. Typically, I think what happens is the source hasn't been updated, so when you run an import job, it's just not importing the right data. Or maybe the input connector may be having an issue. But in the latter case, the input task should fail, and you'll learn it that way. So either way, you'll be able to triage just by looking at the workflow.
And the operator that allows that is called TD_wait. And when we send out the documentation after the webinar, we'll also provide a link to that particular operator and where you can find details on all of our operators.
Okay, cool. I think that's all the questions we have right now, which is great. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Rob and Kyoto, for sharing your expertise. Again, we have several handouts for you guys in the control panel. Go ahead and grab that. And we will be following up, like Rob said, with more documentation for you. And more information. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
And just as a last announcement, we plan on having those more regularly, covering different product areas. So if you have any suggestions, you want to learn more about workflow, you want to learn more about other areas of the product, do let us know, and we will definitely incorporate your feedback.
Yes, absolutely. And we will also be sending out information for our next hands-on webinar, which will be April 11th at 10 a.m. And we are going to learn about JavaScript SDK, demoing the native SDK as well as deploying the SDK inside of Adobe DTM and Google Tag Manager. So that is coming up, and we'll send the invite for that as well. Well, great. Thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you on more of these. And thanks, Ross. Thanks, Kyoto.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.